I'm about to have a conversation with my good friend and brother, Austin Rasmussen. He is the chairman of Republicans Abroad. He's on the board of directors for the Norwegian national level political party, the Liberalistene. He also has a day job in IT, and he has a background in the United States military in military intelligence. Speaking of intelligence, this brother has it in bags. I love this guy. I think you're going to love this conversation. Check it out. This is the Coming Home Podcast with John Allen.
With a lot of focus on military lifestyle as well. Didn't leave a lot of time.
Yeah, that influx of the military life that you got at such a young age is pretty cool.
Yeah.
to put it in layman's terms,
It was a good opportunity for me.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. It's an opportunity that a lot of people look for in their adult years.
Mm-hmm.
But you got it in your childhood, which means I would think that the values, we're rolling, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I would think that those values sit a little bit more firmly in your psyche and your persona.
Certainly.
In your moral foundation.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel it deeply. I was a Marine, but that was, decades ago.
Yeah.
When I was an adult, I was 21 when I went to boot camp.
Yeah.
But you were getting this already at 14, if not earlier.
It was at 14, yeah. And then I joined the actual military when I turned 17 and was there for 7 years. And so certainly that was 11 years worth of grooming, I guess you could say.
Of the positive
that's a taboo word today, but certainly
it can be. Well, don't we groom our children?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
We're going to talk about that. I want to say ahead of time, that's one of the things that I admire most about you. Your moral sense, grounded in military, in your military background, and your sense of family. Mm-hmm. What more does a man need? Of course, there's other things, but if you have those two things solidly in your life, what a start for you, for your family.
Well, I think it is right to say, what more does a man need? I think, because that's the core.
Is it not?
Yeah, it's the core of any responsible man. I think we talk about foundation of morals. One of the more. And maybe I'm not sure if I mentioned his name in the last time we spoke here, but one of the great thinkers that influenced me most at a young age, his name was William Graham Sumner, and he was thinking or writing and speaking and teaching during the 19th century.
Yeah.
And he's in the classical liberal train of thought. And one of
liberalist
in Norway, you would call him a liberalist,
right?
Yes.
We're going to talk about that as well.
Yeah. These terms mean differently.
They do
different things based on geography.
They do.
But in the U.S., you would call him a classical liberal in thought, and one of the he formed the basis for a lot of what libertarian thought is today, and three things. One is taxation is theft, conscription is slavery, the draft is slavery, and war is mass murder, or war equates to murder.
On its surface, there's nothing wrong with those statements.
No.
Now, people will try to pick it apart depending on their political leanings.
Well, and they are
nuanced.
nuanced.
Its surface, there's nuance to it, but on its surface, who can disagree with that?
Yeah, on it, and if we can agree on that as a baseline, then it makes the conversation about going into nuances a lot easier. But another idea that he is responsible for is one called the forgotten man, and that is the idea that if you think of person A, person B, person C, and person X in this concept, person A
all the way down to X, from C to X.
Well, no. Just think of four figures here. Person A and person B would be our perceived legislators. Person C is your everyman. He's the man who gets up, he goes to work, he produces and takes
Yeah.
care of his family and goes home and maintains his household,
Yeah.
and then gets up in the next morning and does the same routine.
Does it again.
Person X is the unproductive, the one that is slacking or irresponsible in some way. And the idea of what this forgotten man idea purports is that person A and person B, as the perceived legislators, they get together and they decide what they and person C is going to do for person X. And when it's all said and done, person A and person B are hailed as leaders, and person C in this equation is the forgotten man. But
Is not person X very often, in modern terms, social minorities?
we'll define social minority.
Um, could we say racial minority?
Uh,
Immigrants in Norway, are they not often perceived as person X?
they can be person X, just as
Society is tiered.
certainly, but I don't think that the lines are drawn as at immigrant versus citizen, because certainly in Norway there is a class divide. Norwegians like to ignore it and pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think that this would apply. I don't think the application of this idea is based on immigration status or skin
Okay.
color.
Okay.
Because you could just as easily be person X if you're a white citizen as you could be being an immigrant from a country that's.
I guess I'm not saying person X is only, for example, an immigrant or only, for example, a racial minority, but a societal minority. In other words, if we're talking about rich versus poor,
Mhm.
the poor, the welfare class,
Mhm.
so to speak, would they not fall into person X? In other words, person A, B, and C
Mhm.
are speaking for them, the leaders of government.
A person A and B.
A and B. I'm sorry, because
Yeah.
C is is the forgotten man.
Yeah.
Persons A and B speak or try to assist
Mhm.
or lift up person X.
Mhm.
So that's where I'm getting, and that person X could be not just immigrants, not just people of a racial minority, but people who are of a lower economic class.
Yes, it would be.
Am I thinking right? I'm just trying to grasp
more or
the
less.
concept.
I mean,
Yeah.
the idea is the idea is pretty basic in the sense that it is whatever A and B are deciding is going to happen for X at the expense of C.
At the expense of.
So yes, person X may be worse off than person C in some ways. But that doesn't give anyone the moral authority to
Right.
rob from person C and redistribute without his consent.
I was going to talk about this a little bit towards the end of our conversation, but we're in on it now. Let me ask you about this. Now, I don't have anything against liberalists. I think that I like some of the things that they stand for. And of course, there's probably nuance. I know there's nuance within the libertarian sector of politics.
Yeah, there's no there's this kind of conflict in the liberalist movement. It's the idea that my worst enemy is a fellow liberalist. You know, as
Yeah.
which is often the case.
Because you have some liberalists who will say government hands off, period.
Mhm.
Whereas I can get more on board, if I can use the term on board, with the liberalist way of thinking, if that sentence is government hands off, comma,
Mhm.
and then there's the nuance.
Yeah, and there you would get into the varied degrees of classical liberalism.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Because local governing is much less evil, so to speak, or damaging upon society. According to the liberalists, it would be much less damaging than state or federal governing.
certainly, and that's where most liberalists can unite,
Okay.
despite their disagreements.
Yeah.
Is saying is to advocate for a system that governs more at the local and community level, because in that way you then have at least more variety, and if you are at an impasse with the community in which you live, it's not difficult for you to find an alternative.
Right.
Whereas when things become more centralized, then you have a more one size fits all system, and then you're kind of in what you're wedged into this position that's almost impossible to get out of unless
Yeah.
the system comes crashing down. And that's where you end up in the position where person C is really the one that suffers the most.
But when you have government at a local level, and you take into consideration that there are different tiers when it comes to economy, personal economy, family economy, does that not mean that some people will need more than others,
Well,
which
certainly
will
that.
mean that there will be a requirement for a higher level of government? Dare I use the word assistance?
uh,
Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, but I
How?
disagree with you on a principled
Tell
level.
me. Yeah, tell
Yeah.
me.
Uh, there will always be someone who needs something, and there will always
Sure.
be people who struggle to provide for themselves, and will
Mhm.
need some form of assistance. Um, a liberalist would tell you that this is where liberalists or libertarians or whatever you want to call this broader sect of thinking, this is where it's easy for them or for us or whatever to be labeled as unempathetic or
That's kind of what I'm touching on. And I'm
yeah.
not saying
No,
that
no, no.
you or even most libertarians are unsympathetic, but I do think that that sympathy or that public good issue is very lightly addressed to the
Well,
point where it's ambiguous, and then people can point the finger and say, "Well, you are
It,
unsympathetic." Do you see what I'm
it's
saying?
ambiguous to the extent that liberalists wouldn't presume to know the right answers, whereas a statist presumes they know all the answers.
The answer
And
being the state
the
should
state,
just step in
yes, and
and
that's what it's
yeah.
saying. Not we're not a liberalist wouldn't say that that person shouldn't be helped. That's not at all what a liberalist is saying. What a liberalist is saying is that um, you do not have the right to hire a government official to take from me and the fruit of my labor to help that person.
So how should that person be helped
Uh,
then?
however, the market where they live decides to help them. Um,
So we're talking way down on the local
Well,
level.
in the sense that I have no interest in my neighbor starving. I have no interest in my community being dilapidated.
Okay.
And
Okay.
if I were taking home 100% of my resources and 100% of the fruit of my labor, I would be dumping 100% of whatever I give into my community. It's not my concern what someone 3,000 miles away is going through. As much as I might sympathize with them and feel bad for them, you should not be taking from me to provide for something where I don't see the result of my labor and my productivity. So it's the idea of statism is utopic in nature in that you can
Mhm.
always achieve all of these things
Mhm.
all over the world. We
Yeah.
just need a little bit more. We just need a little bit more, and we're
It's
just
always a little more.
yeah. And now we're in a time where the
Higher
government,
taxes.
yeah, well, and higher taxes, which is kind of kooky in the sense that the government is already printing or spending money faster than they can print it. The debt ceiling is always being raised in every centralized central banking country, and
Yeah.
so then the idea
Yeah.
is if the government can just print as much money as they want,
See,
and that's
yeah.
just taxation by other means,
See, and
then
that's where
why
you and
tax me in the
I
first place?
exactly, and that's where you and I can meet,
Yeah.
even though we're on different ends
Mm-hmm.
of the political spectrum. The tax system is out of whack.
Mm-hmm.
It would be different in the sense that it would be more acceptable that we are taxed the way we are,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's here in Norway or back home in the States. It would be more acceptable if those tax dollars were properly used. And by properly, I mean, you can look at the budget, you can look at the deficit,
Yeah.
and you see these things, and that tells you that money is not being properly used.
No, absolutely not.
So it's
And
easy
just in
to
the transaction
extrapolate.
of when the
It's,
money here in Norway, when the money is taxed from us, when it in the process of going from us to whatever its end allocation is,
yeah,
20% of it is lost on the way just from being processed by the bureaucracy.
bureaucracy.
And I'm saying I know better what to do with my money. Just because you're a bureaucrat does not give you some higher sense of knowledge of where
Right,
my money should go. And
right.
I'm saying that belongs in my community, where
Well,
my kids go to school, where my neighbors live. And
Well,
it
there is, yeah, I can agree with you that there is a certain amount of arrogance at the bureaucratic level. They do think that they know better than us what we actually need.
Mhm.
They know better than us what our money is good for. And by so many people believing that, or at least letting it slide, we have financial troubles. There's, this humongous deficit. There's this huge debt. If this was a business, somebody would be in jail.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, we can look now. It seems like we're getting at least one or two scandals here in Norway once every month,
yeah,
and it doesn't matter what the party affiliation is. It's Høyre, Arbeiderpartiet. It doesn't matter. There's always
something.
there's always now. It seems to be a consistent stream
Yeah,
where there's some new politician who
yeah,
is making some transaction that they shouldn't have been making, or hiring somebody to a position that they shouldn't have been hiring to, or funneling money to some
yeah,
organization or project that shouldn't have gotten that.
yeah.
And those the people that do it are either quickly forgotten, they never face any real repercussions, and that is the nature of the bureaucratic beast. And the
Yes.
reason why liberalists have problems with it is
Yep.
because, okay, if you're a high ranking person in that system, okay, then you will be published in the media for your wrongdoings. But
Yeah.
let's say you're a low level bureaucrat
What
and you
then?
don't
Yeah.
have a name. Well,
Right.
those people are always protected by anonymity. The system,
Especially here in Norway.
especially here in
Especially
Norway.
here
The
in
system
Norway.
in Norway is not will never admit fault. They might make some negligent or superficial concessions in really big cases. I'll give you an example. Norway has lost in the double digits of human rights violations
Mm.
when it comes to Barnavana and
Yes.
child protective services, and I have to admit, as of 2017, the number, and I tend to call them kidnappings, Barnavana, the number of kidnappings has been declining over the last 6 years. But leading up to those 6 years, the number was increasing every year.
Yeah.
And now, when you talk about person X or whether or not it's an immigrant, this is where it was a real problem.
Yes.
Because half of the children they were taking from
I
homes
can.
were
Yes.
children of immigrants.
And I can say amen to that. I was a contractor for Barnavarn in 3 regions up
Mhm.
north when we
Okay.
lived up there. I hired myself out
Mhm.
as something of an expert in the field, and I don't want to dig up any old wounds. I don't want to hurt anybody, but I'll say openly and honestly that I think it was horrific the way minorities were treated.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing: it wasn't out of malice. It was always out of this.
Cultural
Um,
differences.
yeah, but it was so patronizing.
Mhm.
That's what I'm getting at. It was almost as if even the parents were treated as children. Oh, you don't know what's best.
Mhm.
Let us do this.
Yeah.
See, so there are certain libertarian ways of thinking that I can get down with. I can agree with that. But I think where you and I split, and it's okay. We had a great conversation last time. We're going to have another one this time. But I don't want to talk about just what we agree on. I want to talk a little bit about where we split.
Sure.
For example, I see the value in less big government, more local government.
Mhm.
I see the value in that. But here's a question that I haven't seen a clear cut answer to um, from a libertarian or a liberalist here in Norway or a libertarian back home, where it seems so undefined what that local level of government is. How much government is local? Is it your neighbor? Is it your county? Is it your region? How far out does that government come from? Where is that office? Is it next door or is it 100 miles away?
Well, I mean, I would say for starters, the Constitution in its current form should be enforced more strictly. Specifically, the 10th Amendment, which restricts or is in theory supposed to restrict what the federal government is permitted to do, and in which areas they are allowed to exercise their authority.
So, are you saying that the federal government is exercising authority where they shouldn't, or are they exercising authority within certain aspects of government, but they're just overdoing it?
I'm saying
Because that's two different things.
both.
You think the federal government is doing both?
Both, yes.
I'm not disagreeing, but can you give an example?
Well, I would say that the 10th Amendment says that if it isn't explicitly written in the Constitution,
Then it's for the
then
states.
it's for the state or the people.
Yeah.
And so I'd say that you can pretty much put up, you could, let's say we could cover this wall with all government operations. And you ask me for an example, I say just throw a dart at the wall
Yeah.
because you're going to hit something.
Yeah.
Because most of what the government does, they shouldn't be doing. I would say that the government should be focused almost entirely just on national defense, and enforcing legal. Excuse me. You could say enforcing the laws that are on the books, and that's about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really those two things.
On its surface, I
Law
see
enfor- Oh,
absolutely nothing wrong with that.
yeah.
I see absolutely nothing wrong with that. But the federal government is big already. So how
Mhm.
do you reduce it?
Well, you need the right guy, I guess,
Ah,
to come in, and I mean, if you're going to do it peacefully, then you need the right guy to come in and break that up. Uh,
well, I would take it further and say you need the right person backed by the proper political party, because I don't think either major party,
no,
regardless of who's sitting in the White House, they're not going to have the party support to make those kind of changes.
no, and I'm not even sure it's going to come down to a party. It will most likely, if it is going to have any reparation for the continued success of the nation, as opposed to the decline and ultimate failure of the nation,
Yeah.
it's going to come from the states just taking back their power.
How?
How? Saying "f you" to the government whenever they get an order. I mean, it's either that or they secede from the
Well, we're
union.
kind of seeing that already.
Well,
Not the
we are absolutely.
secession, but
Yep.
the FU to the government from
Yep.
Texas, Florida.
Yep.
Um,
And it'll start to catch on more and more, I think.
I think it will. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing if you have reasonable people in charge of those states.
Well, what's really going to need to happen from these states is if they're going to do it right, then they can't be afraid of losing the federal funding that they get.
Well, there's a
Um,
big problem. Yeah,
yeah.
the purse strings.
So
Yeah.
that's what I mean is you need the right people in place to say, okay, we are willing to cut the purse strings. I mean, and because that's how the federal government operates. One of the greatest examples of this was, and I have to commend him for his approach, but it was when Ronald Reagan when that administration and government was raising the drinking age to 21.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan said, okay, well, we don't really have the authority to mandate this at the federal level, but what we'll do is we will restrict highway funding to all the states that don't raise the drinking age to 21.
I remember that.
And eventually, I mean, most states got on board pretty quickly, but there were a few stragglers that didn't get around to it until the early 90s. And it's because they wanted that federal funding. But you
Well,
need the right people involved to say, okay, we're cutting the purse strings ourselves.
well, I think you have states like Florida, Texas, New York, um, Alaska to a certain extent that would be the first to give the middle finger to the federal government. But I don't see them getting very much support outside of the states that I mentioned. You may have a very right leaning government in, for example, Tennessee,
Mhm.
but they need that federal funding.
Certainly.
And I think that's going to keep them quiet.
Mhm.
So, and I guess what I'm saying is I feel that the federal government has a hold on things and it's always going to because of that federal funding.
Well, nothing is forever.
No, but where do you see, or do you see the federal government losing? Of course, the budget, the deficit, it's chaos. It's financial chaos. But do you see it getting so bad that the federal government can no longer function and enforce the rules that are in place as they are now, be them right or wrong?
uh, I think the federal government is already struggling to enforce the rules. Already
Do you
struggling.
think so?
Yeah.
I mean, I really don't see it.
It depends on
You have
which.
people.
I guess it
You have
depends on
people
which
like.
rules you're talking about.
Well, I
But
guess you have governors like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott,
Mhm.
Texas and Florida. They're them, and who else at the state level? Who else is really
You have Christy
pushing
Noem
back?
up in South Dakota. She is her state isn't as populous, but
I'll give
she's
you that. Yeah,
definitely in the same league.
But I have to say, I'm not familiar with the financial situation up there. Are they?
They're doing quite well.
They've got a lot of oil the
They got a lot of
last
oil. They've had
couple
a recent
decades.
boom
Yes,
in natural gas, and so they are
they
doing
could
well.
probably do it. Yeah, they
Yeah.
can probably lift that middle finger.
Their economy has been booming over the
Yeah.
last 10, 15 years. So it's
I actually was evaluating moving there.
Yeah.
We had just come to Norway in 2002, and then I believe it was around 2004 when things were really booming with the oil business.
Mhm.
And Snoopy and I, we really, really evaluated me going there for a year
Yeah.
and working just for the experience and, of course, for the money.
Yeah.
That was an easy $250,000 paycheck for
Yeah.
a year at that time,
Yeah.
which was a lot of money
Hmm. Not
then
as
and
much
now.
now.
Yeah. Yeah, true. Inflation. So yeah, I guess South Carolina could do it, but I don't know,
South
and there,
Dakota.
or
Yeah.
South Dakota, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, and there could be a couple other states, but I just don't see I don't see the revolution coming. I see a lot
No,
of talk, especially in the Republican side of things,
I
but
don't.
I don't see anything really
Well, I guess it depends
happening.
on how you define revolution. I don't think there's a revolution coming
That's tongue in
either.
cheek, I guess. It's
Yeah.
yeah,
Now we're it's in a stagnant position right now, but we
it is.
certainly are on
It is.
track as a declining nation. We are not a vibrant, booming nation at the moment. Things are not going well.
With the fastest growing economy at the moment.
Uh, tell that to the middle class and lower class Americans. They don't see that.
Yeah, why? What do you think? And I know they don't see that,
Yeah.
but to me, that's fascinating.
Well,
Why?
but to say the fastest growing economy is completely gaslighting most of the country because nobody's seeing that. You can say fastest growing economy on the books, but it's fastest growing compared to what? And certainly coming out of COVID, everything is fastest growing because everything was stopped.
I would, yeah, I hear you. I wouldn't say it's gaslighting them. I mean, it's looking at only one aspect on the books, as you say, but in practical terms on the street, yeah, I agree with you. People are not seeing it.
Yeah,
Um, One thing I'll say is that the Republicans are very good at shining a light on that fact
sure.
that the poor and the middle class, lower middle class, even the upper middle class, what middle class actually, and
Yeah.
the right is doing a very good job of painting a picture of reality on the ground. The books say this, but the people feel this.
Hmm.
They're experiencing this. This is what's happening to their households.
Yeah.
Hats off to the political right. I think the left is doing a horrible job of, there could be, if nothing more, there could be some comfort if more people were aware of what that means to have a fast growing economy on the books.
Hmm.
It could give some hope,
Sure.
which, you can value that or you can not value hope, but it would definitely do something to the mindset of a lot of people who are against the political left when it comes to all things finance.
Hmm.
And they're just doing a horrible job of addressing it. In other words, they're not addressing it.
No, they're not, and I'm not even sure that the Republicans are addressing it that well either. I think it's
Well, they're certainly pointing out the small man.
which is easy to
Not
do because Americans are already feeling the pain. If your
Yeah.
arm is broken, you don't need someone to point at you and say, "Hey, your arm's broken,"
Well,
because they're feeling it.
yeah, but it goes over to the feelings. People feel better hearing what the Republicans are saying because
Sure.
the Republicans are saying something that is factual for them.
Yeah, I guess it depends on
Do you see
which
what I mean?
Republican. Sure, but I think in general, Americans at a rapid pace are losing faith in that political class in general,
Yeah.
which is one of the reasons why Trump, for example, can still maintain his levels of popularity despite all of his legal troubles and battles and everything. It's
How do you feel about that? What do you think is the main reason for this?
for Trump.
Yeah.
Uh,
I find it quite fascinating. I
it
think
is.
I have a theory as to why he's as popular as he is, but it's just fascinating that someone in his situation is the top guy.
Yeah.
That's mind blowing.
It is interesting that this is where we are.
Yeah.
I as far as why he's as popular as I think it's a combination of reasons, and it really depends on which voters you ask. I think for a large number of voters, he kind of represents an fu to the system itself.
Yeah. I
Uh,
get that.
I think
Yeah.
every time he gets indicted, his numbers go up.
Yeah.
And I think a reason for that, for example, is because every time he gets indicted is just pushing on the pressure point for normal everyday Americans to
Yeah.
realize, remember, and notice that, yeah, in fact, we do live in a two-tier justice system
Yeah.
because every one of these other politicians get away with murder.
We live
And
in a two-tier justice system. Again, here you and I agree
you know,
on that statement.
mhm.
But if we break it down on what it means, what does a two-tier justice system mean to you?
The political elite versus everyone else.
Okay. I think the financial elite, the social elite against everyone else.
Financial elite, if you're talking like white collar crime, for example,
Yeah.
or yeah, oh, certainly there's a two-tier justice system
Yeah.
there as well. Um, I think for different sociological reasons. Well, maybe not so different, I guess. White collar crime or white collar criminals have access to power just like the political elite do, just through different channels. But certainly that exists. But as far as contemporary politics go, I don't think that that's what a lot of Americans are thinking about. I think they're looking at the political elite and what
Mm.
the political elite can get away with versus what. Well, you mentioned it earlier. If so, if you and I were running a business like the government runs the government, we'd be in
Yeah.
jail by now.
Yeah.
And I think.
I think that pisses everybody off, regardless of political leanings. I
Mhm.
think everybody can kind of,
Well,
yeah,
that's what really
we
what.
can have a group hug and agree on that.
Well, and it's unfortunate.
I
That's the
think
only thing we should be focusing on. It should be.
to a large extent, I agree with you.
We
There's a
could be
lot of BS
united.
being talked about that doesn't really mean much in the
Doesn't
end.
matter. Everybody should be asking, "Where's my money?" That's it. Where's my money? And you and I can lock arms on that topic. Where's my money? Where's it going? What are you doing with it? Where's my money? And when Americans are getting beaten, not just by taxation, but by inflation, by government spending,
Yeah.
all of these things, and then still be caught up with meaningless culture wars as being a more impassioned subject, fine, focus on it as much as you want. But how is your bottom line and your wallet not the most
Yeah.
important thing?
Yeah. That's what makes the world go round,
Yeah.
in the end. Who do you think is the worst perpetrator of the senseless culture wars? The left or the right?
Uh,
Or are they equal?
it's a it's a broad question.
It's very broad. Let's break
Yeah.
it down, though. We have time.
Well, broadly speaking, I would say without question, it's the left.
Really?
Where I would say the right is at fault here is that they entertain it too much. Because it is political capital, certainly. So they're not stupid for entertaining it or exploiting it, but it, ethically speaking, shouldn't be the political focus on either side.
Right.
But the reason I would say that the left is the worst is because the motivations of the left are, I find, to be more morally reprehensible than the right. The left does have this a motive to control on a collectivist basis,
Mhm.
whereas the right is motivated by individuals guiding their own family unit. And that's where I find the divide to be.
But that implies that people on the right are more focused on family than
Certainly.
people on the left.
Family politics, absolutely.
What do you mean by family politics?
Or I should say that
Because if
in the sense that families should have autonomy. A family unit should have autonomy and should not be guided by politics coming down from a distant location.
But I think if you're a poor family, you're living in a ghetto, you're on welfare, you're very concerned.
So the government's
about,
already destroyed your family.
and you have a tendency to want that to continue.
Yeah.
It's a conditioning.
It's an addiction.
Exactly, generation after generation after generation. Be it right or be it wrong, that's what is happening. You become accustomed to it, and you want that government check.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that is a very broad statement. That is not to say that there are individuals who don't rise out of that. It's not to say that there aren't families who push against that and try to make something out of themselves, and in fact do make something out of themselves.
But this makes the point that I'm saying that what you're describing there is leftist policy when it comes to getting.
Well, social welfare is leftist policy.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
And I'm saying that those policies destroy families.
But do you think that is the intent? You called it morally reprehensible.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that was the intention when it started.
Exactly.
But I think if we can see the results now and still think that we can do the same thing over and over again and expect different results is, as Einstein said, the definition of insanity.
So do you think that broadly that the left wants these social welfare programs in place to gain votes? Do you think that's their motivation?
Well, if you are a voter in a position that you described, in a ghetto situation or a trailer park situation, and you are
well, a ghetto situation and a trailer park situation are two different sides of the same coin.
Not if they're getting the same welfare check.
I have to disagree.
Well, let's say for the sake of my argument, they're both dependent on the same welfare check. So I'm saying these two things are equal. Yeah. These two things are equal.
Understand.
And they have a dependency on this. Their family depends on this.
Yeah.
these people are not likely to vote for someone who's going to change or alter that policy that's going to remove their dependency. So certainly, I do think that there are cynical politicians that rise to power uh, with knowing that they
Yeah.
can get these votes in the bank.
But I see this thing that has happened since the Trump years, where, and this is where I tend to draw a difference. You tell me if I'm right or wrong. I tend to draw a difference between the ghetto and the trailer park.
Mhm.
The ghetto, I think, urban, Black, Latino.
Okay.
Trailer park, and Democrat.
Hmm.
Okay, urban, Black, Latino, Democrat.
Hmm.
Trailer park, I'm probably pissing off a lot of Blacks and Latinos here. And now I'm going to piss off some white people, because when I think of trailer park, I think rural or suburban,
Hmm.
white,
Hmm.
Republican.
Hmm.
In other words, I find this fascinating. These people are in relatively the same situation, very often dependent on the same government assistance, and
Mhm.
yet the one group tends to vote Democrat and the other group tends to vote Republican.
Hmm.
One of them, the Democrat group, it can be argued that they are perpetuating their own torment.
Sure.
The other group, they're perpetuating their own torment, but in the sense, let me say this right, they're not perpetuating their own torment, even as they draw those same government funds, but they're voting Republican, which has representative after representative calling for the ending of those very same government programs that these trailer park people, if I can use that term without malice,
Hmm.
I'm just using it for the example here. These people who live in a trailer park are actually voting for those Republicans who want to end the programs that they benefit from.
Hmm.
Fascinating.
It is. Yeah.
They're in the same. I see an allyship lost
Hmm.
between the trailer park Republicans and the ghetto high rise Democrats. There
Yeah.
should be an allyship there. How have they become so split, polarized in their political leanings?
Uh, I think
Well, first, I guess you have to agree that there is a split there, even though they're in the same situation. Do you agree that most of the trailer park whites are voting Republican?
not necessarily, or at least I would say
I
that
don't have any numbers. It's just a
no.
perception thing.
I would say that the ballots being cast from the trailer park are probably fewer than those being cast in the ghetto, proportionately speaking. And then I would
Probably.
also say that those being cast from the trailer park are also there's going to be a more diverse party choice. I don't think it's going to be. It may lean Republican. Let's say use that.
I agree with
I'm
you.
going to lean on that word. It's going to lean
I
Republican,
agree with you
but
there.
it's not
Yeah,
going to be
not exclusively.
or majority, or I mean super majority even. Whereas in the ghettos, it will super majority be
Supermajority Democrat.
Democrat.
I'll agree with you on that. Yeah,
But as far as
but
the
it is a political split nonetheless within a relatively similar demographic.
Mhm.
The only difference is skin color.
Yeah.
How did skin color get so political?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. Yeah,
People will accuse me of perpetuating that, but I think it's a sad thing that skin color is so politicized.
yeah. Certainly, it is a sad thing that it is that. We can all wish that it wasn't.
It's politicized from Republican mouthpieces who say the type of things that they say that are less than factual when it comes to immigration, whether it's legal or illegal
Mhm.
immigration. Is perpetuated by Democrat representatives and mouthpieces who play the culture war game
Mhm.
that we were talking about. Um, Skin color, race is politicized.
Sure, it is that. And how
It's ugly.
it's ugly, and how we solve that is the
This
yeah, well, this
conversation,
having a
dialogue.
conversation certainly. And
Mhm.
I think one of the bigger solutions to this is a more communal way of living, and turning
Mm.
off the mouthpieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Communal way of living. I started off by saying that I highly admire you as a family man.
Mhm.
Hats off to you on that. We are kindred spirits in that sense. Everything for the family. That woman that you met in there is very much the reason I am the man that I am today. She's my driving force. And my kids, you'll meet them afterwards. I do everything for them.
Mhm.
I know you think the same way. That's why you do what you do. That's why you are who you are.
Yes.
So when you talk about politics starting in the home or in the neighborhood or in the smaller microcosm of the greater society,
Mhm.
I can dig it. I agree with you. But how will we get to that? Because there's so much in the way. Is it a pipe dream?
Well,
Is it a utopia? You talked about so much of what the left is talking about is this fantasy
mhm.
world, and to a large degree, it is. But people will say that your or the libertarian way of thinking is a fantasy as well. It's not practical. It's not doable.
Well, the end station politics of libertarian is certainly utopic in nature.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Um, it it
because that would be a perfect world.
it would be a perfect world,
Mm,
and the idea is just to stay on the train to that
yeah.
destination. Whether or not we arrive there certainly won't happen in my lifetime. Uh, but when we take it back to the beginning of the conversation, and for my and yourself,
Mm.
family being core. The reason I brought up William Graham Sumner was eventually to get to another um, um, idea of his or point that he made was
Did I
this.
cut you off
No,
a
no, no,
half
no,
hour ago?
no, no, no.
I, know,
We went on
I
different
get accused of
tangents.
talking too
No, no,
much on my own show
we went on
sometimes.
different tangents, and uh, but one of the points he put forward was addressing this idea of a social contract, and
Yep.
what does a social contract mean? And in his argument, you can call it left if you want, but the statist or collectivist idea of a social contract is that we have obligation to our fellow man,
Yeah.
and that we owe our fellow man. Whereas Sumner's position would argue that no, we owe nothing to our fellow man. If there is a social contract, what that would be is something that exists naturally, in the sense that my only obligation is to take care of myself to the best of my ability. And defining myself, I would, in that definition, include my private property and the family or
Yeah.
whomever live on that property.
Yeah.
If everyone aspired to live a life where you are taking care of yourself and yours, and if you were living in a neighborhood where all of
Mhm.
your neighbors were doing the same,
Yeah.
then I think if you're trying to shift culture in that direction, then we would be living in a lot better world. Because at some point, and obviously this is again where the accusations of lack of empathy come in, but taking care of myself also, it includes the school that my kids go to. It includes the street that my house is on. It includes the area in which I live. I don't want homeless drug addicts sleeping on the curb. I don't
Yeah.
want people living in poverty 2 houses down from me. I don't want uh, my kids or my family
Mm.
to have those hardships in our community. And so, and that's in the sense of what a social contract is. And so, when you talk about, the utopic nature of the extreme versus the extreme, certainly they both exist.
Sure.
But how we get there, I think, is I'm not interested, and nor do I think it's possible that we get to that better uh, living through legislative action or through government interference.
So how do we do it then?
There has to be a change in the culture
How do we do that?
um, by doing what I'm doing and what you're doing.
Example, lead by example, in other
Lead by
words.
example and build a family
And then
and
hope
raise children that
and then hope
have
that
those
our
values.
neighbors look in our window, or well, if they're not looking in our window, look in our
Yeah.
yard
Yep.
and see how well we're doing. And
Hmm.
then maybe through dialogue or just through observation, wash, rinse, and repeat.
Yes. And demonstrate that this is this is how we build a better community for each other.
But what about law enforcement?
What about law enforcement?
Our neighbors, while we are doing things the best way we know how, our neighbors may or may not be doing things the best way they know how, but they may do something to cause harm or potential harm
Hmm.
to us and our family.
Hmm.
Um, are we thinking Wild West, where everyone has a revolver, or by whatever means they protect them and theirs, and that's it. And there's no need for law enforcement because
No, no, no. As far as I'm not an anarchist.
no,
Uh, if you were to,
but I don't see that being addressed very often by people who think in a libertarian
well,
way.
well,
Law enforcement is very
then I
rarely
would say that
addressed.
you're not looking into it deeply enough because it is one of the biggest tenets of
Okay,
libertarianism is law enforcement.
educate me, please.
In the
And I
sense,
say that humbly.
yeah, uh, i- in your mainstream idea of libertarianism, which is a big umbrella and does
Yeah.
have a lot of uh, factions within it.
Sure. A lot of nuance.
But the mainstream idea of is that the government only has those three tasks that I mentioned before, and that is security, uh, law enforcement, and a judicial system,
Yeah, you
which
mentioned
exists for contract enforcement, for example.
yeah, you mentioned the federal government should have a hand in national defense.
Yeah.
But local defense, in other words, there should be a law
There
enforcement
should
on
be
the
a
local level.
police
Okay.
apparatus.
See,
Absolutely.
I'm learning now, and I have to be honest. I have to be. My mother said I have to be honest. I don't know that much about libertarian views. The most I know is from you, from the occasional article or video of someone giving a lecture, and Michael Smerconish on CNN from time to time talks about it. That's it. So I don't have a broad knowledge. You've probably given me the most knowledge about it, and this is only the second time we've spoken on my show, so that tells you how much I know. So I'm trying to learn.
Yeah, well, those are the major tenets, and law enforcement is certainly one of them. However, what that law enforcement is tasked with would be on a much smaller scale than what it is tasked with doing today.
Okay.
In that there wouldn't, ideally speaking, there wouldn't be as many laws in the books as there are today.
What kind of laws would you say should be removed?
Pretty much every law that doesn't concern violating private property, violence
Yeah.
against others, any kind of assault or anything that's basically in any kind of physical
assault,
contact
physical
that
harm.
lacks consent, essentially.
Battery in all forms, major or minor.
Yeah. And then in parallel to that, contract enforcement through the judicial system.
I have to tell you, as a police officer, I was a police officer for 7 years. Maybe I have a libertarian mindset because a lot of the conflicts, I wasn't in too many domestic conflicts because I worked narcotics and gangs. But the conflicts that I did see, very often, I felt that they were conflicts that should have been solved by it wasn't a police matter. I think a lot of police officers today, this is 20 years ago when I was a cop, but I think a lot of police officers today would agree with me. They are involved in a lot of things that shouldn't be police work.
Namely, the war on drugs.
Well, I think we talked about that the first time. Did we agree that drugs should not be, narcotics should not be illegal?
That's my position.
It's mine too.
Yeah.
I remember we talked about that, and I was pretty sure we agreed. And we did agree. There's a lot of law enforcement overreach.
A lot of law enforcement overreach and a lot of excess law enforcement personnel. And with that,
defund the police?
No, not defund the police.
Refund.
Refund.
Well, I've always said that defund the police was the stupidest. I'll say it till I die. The left is horrible at messaging.
Yep.
If the left would have said we have police doing things that they should not be doing, let's refund the entire system of law enforcement and the judicial system so that the police can get a little bit of relief and focus on the things that they need to do. I think that's a great message, and I don't know of anyone
you could pretty much
would disagree with
that to any crucial function that the government has today. The allocation of funds and where
looking
it's going.
Looking at the financial chaos, which is
education,
the federal government. I think that would apply pretty much across the board.
Yeah. And there are a lot of agencies that are redundant and unnecessary enforcing laws that shouldn't be on the books in the first place, namely enforcing crimes that have no victim.
Yeah.
Or enforcing apprehension for crimes that have no victim.
Yeah.
And so then you it's a process. The ATF is the first one that comes to mind for me. That basically converts citizen to criminal
Yeah.
for crimes that had no victim,
Yeah.
and on a mass scale.
Yep.
And it's a machine that's hard to rebuild, or at least
And of
get
course,
rid of.
within that, there's a lot to discuss about weapons, the legality of them, moderation, smart gun control, no gun. There's so much to talk about there. But as a law enforcement entity, I think the biggest mistake at the federal level, I believe,
Mhm.
is the ATF.
Yes, and on top of that, it's a redundant enforcement agency. It's
Hello.
they have no there is nothing in their mission that isn't already being served by an
The
existing
FBI,
agency.
the
Yeah.
DEA, local law enforcement.
Yes.
Excuse me. And I can say that both as an American citizen and as a former police officer. I've never really been able to get my head around the purpose of I mean, I know their purpose,
Yeah.
but I don't see their proper place
Yeah.
in law enforcement.
Well, and
Never
it's in their
have.
name: alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. That should be a good time for everybody.
Sounds like a party. Sounds like a party.
Yes.
Let me ask you something. Libertarian,
Mhm.
55%, Republican, 45%. I'm talking about you.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's I don't want to say there's a duality, but you still are the
Chairman
chairman for Republicans abroad.
Yes,
Yes.
I am, but
So where, because I see them as two I've been fascinated about this, and I didn't get to ask you this before. I don't think it fascinates me. I find it very interesting. I'd like to know your process or your reasoning, because I see Republican and Libertarian as two. They're not even distant cousins. I don't think.
well, they're
My
cousins.
opinion. And again, I don't know that much about libertarians.
Well, if you were to take what the Republican Party and what its roots are and what it originally was, it would be the Libertarian Party of
yes.
today. And then
Agreed.
It's also important, which is a common tendency of Americans in general, but certainly those on the left, is to look at the Republican Party as if it's this monolith, as if it's
It's definitely not.
this homogenous organization. There are a lot of different sects within the Republican Party, and one of them being the classical liberal branch. You can see how, for example, the man that I vote for in every primary that he's running in, that I can vote in, Rand Paul, is always at odds with the rest of the party.
Yeah.
On just about everything. He's the odd man out. Him and Thomas Massey. And so that branch of the party certainly exists.
Yeah.
So that if I were to somehow categorize or define myself, I would say that I'm a classical liberal. I don't even necessarily like the term libertarian, because there are a lot of implications in that as well, which is, I think, if I were to go into it, it'd be a lot of inside baseball.
No, I understand.
But so I generally categorize myself as a classical liberal, and then beyond that, I would say, for those that are libertarians, or classical liberals, like to split hairs on this stuff, and within that, I'm probably in the minarchist camp, which advocates for a night watchman state.
Yeah. Night watchman state. We're going back to pre-Revolutionary War for that.
Or around that time, the conception of the United States and what it should be.
That's quite the mental philosophical exercise to try and imagine that today.
Mm-hmm.
At its core, at first thought, I don't see anything wrong with it.
What if I get a glass of water?
Oh, I'm sorry. There's a pitcher of water right there, and there's your glass. There's your glass. Terrible host.
No.
Let me take this minute to plug my audiobook, everybody. Go to johnallenpod.com. That's JOHNALANPOD.com. That's where you'll find my audiobook. You want to know a little bit more about me, go a little bit in depth, where I'm from, why I'm here, and a little bit about what happened on the way. Go there. Check out my audiobook, johnallenpod.com. You'll like it, and it's me reading it. Where were we? Everything goes blank when I try to plug my own work. So.
Discussing going back to conception of the U.S.
Yeah, and when I look at how it was, of course, being without the slavery thing, would have been great. Uh, being free of the oppression of Great Britain would have been great.
Hmm.
But if you look at the way things were run, with very much focus on a uh, um, uh, local law enforcement, local judicial system,
Local governance.
local governance, period, it seemed to work.
Yep.
Yeah.
With some major exceptions, such as slavery, for example. Even that in itself was contrary to what was being founded at the time. The Constitution,
Which a
in its
lot,
original form, protected even the rights of slaves.
and
And
that is why a lot of Black Americans check out of the political process, because they see it as nothing but hypocrisy as long as that issue is not dealt with.
Mhm.
Is that a fault, or is that to be commended?
To check out,
This checking out of the entire political system because of that hypocrisy. That is an issue in the Black culture in America.
I'm aware that it's an issue in America in general. I guess it depends on what it means to check out, and what that how that's defined.
Not voting.
Oh yeah.
They're not doing anything for us. They never have. They never will. I'm not voting.
Yeah.
There's
So
too many Black Americans
I
who
think
are there.
I think a lot of Americans feel that way, regardless of race. But I understand that
Sure,
within in the
they're
Black
all of their
community,
different reasons, but this
there's
particular reason about slavery
yes,
affects the voting habits of Black Americans.
I think
Slavery and the fact that it hasn't been properly
I
dealt with, according to
well,
the
I think
majority of
yeah,
Black Americans.
okay, properly dealt with. That's a another conversation. But to
It
say
is.
that
It's a long one too.
yeah, but to say to check out solely because of slavery, I would be interested in that conversation with those who feel that way, in the sense to say, okay, maybe I can understand that it started with the hypocrisy of slavery and how that in
And it
itself
has grown. Yeah,
violated with the Constitution. But
exactly.
then to fast forward and all along that way, now you have large Black communities that have been stuck in this ghetto living situation
Generations.
for generations.
Mm.
You have government programs that have destroyed the Black families, and so in that sense, I could see
Yes. To check
easily
out.
check out,
Yeah,
because they haven't done
exactly.
anything for us. They only come around when they want our vote,
Exactly. Yeah.
and so certainly I wouldn't blame anyone for checking out of that.
Vote for Cornell West,
I wouldn't go
and
that
we
far.
both laugh. And we both laugh.
Yeah. But
Nice try, Cornell. Nice try.
He just switched
Slight
parties.
distraction. It's not even that much of a distraction. He's just. I think he's. Why is he doing this?
Well, he just went from Green Party to Independent, correct?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
but what he went from was a respected mind,
Mm.
a respected academic,
Mhm.
to a clown, a political clown.
Yeah.
That's what he went. And
Yeah.
I think it's sad,
It is sad.
because I love that guy,
Yeah.
but I really, really have no stomach for what he's doing now
Yep.
with politics.
Yep.
I just don't have a stomach for it. It's clownish.
It is, and a lot of the people in that
Beautiful mind. He's a great academic,
Mhm.
but this thing that he's doing, why?
But I think
Why?
in most of the people, if not all of the people in that arena, are in that arena as clowns.
I
And
think so.
the
Spotlight syndrome.
yeah, the
Give me my moment.
yeah, the quicker people can look away from that,
Yeah.
which they are. They are.
Yeah.
I mean, and
'Cause it's about- 'cause it's
legacy
about give
media
me-
is
yeah.
declining.
Yeah, because it's about give me my moment. It's not about what I'm actually going to do for you. Because I don't see any realism in what Cornel West is saying.
Mhm.
So the default then is that he's just trying to have his moment, which
Mm-hmm.
I just have no stomach for that in politics. Politics changes lives.
Mhm.
It's not about your moment. It's about the lives that you're going to affect
Yep.
as a politician. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. It should be, anyways. It's what it should be.
It should
about.
be in its
Uh,
purest form.
Yes. Now,
More utopia.
yeah, yeah. Which
I'm going to title this the Utopian Conversation.
yeah. I hope not.
No, I won't.
We
I
can
won't
we
do
can
that.
move to more substantive things that are actually going to be addressed. And
No, but I
that's
think people like Cornel West, I mean, he's relevant in the sense that he's creating a wave. It's not a big wave. Mostly people can just laugh at him. But what about Mr. Kennedy?
he is definitely the debate around Kennedy is, I think, who's he going to pull more from?
Yes, that remains to be seen. It's going to be an interesting development.
He-
What's your thoughts?
uh, Republican Party has been shifting their position on Kennedy quite rapidly in the last 2 or 3 days, and, uh, and that's been interesting.
Wonder why.
Yeah, that's been interesting to watch. So,
In
the
all seriousness, let me just interject here, just for people who may not be familiar with that situation. He went from running as a Democrat against Biden to running as an independent,
yes.
and now there's a different vibe coming from the Republican Party in regards to him.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
Well,
very interesting.
and he left the Democrat Party because the
Yes,
Democrat Party has
did
a
not.
very corrupted way of handling their
The
candidates.
DNC
Yes,
is, yeah,
and so he knew his bread wasn't going to get buttered there,
right,
and he
right.
had no choice but to go outside. So I mean, he has potential as far as independent candidates go. It would be hard to find one that has more potential than he does.
At this moment,
At this moment, I don't think it's possible for him to win.
I don't either.
But he's certainly
He's
going to
going to create some
damage
waves.
both establishments, both party establishments. Um, I know that it's in trend right now to say that he's going to damage Trump or he's going to pull voters for him. I doubt it.
I think that's just spin because of his announcing as an independent.
Well, and the idea
Uh,
with Trump and his base, they are hardcore and set. You're
Yes.
not going to pull a lot. You can pull some stragglers off maybe, but you're not going to pull a lot from that.
And I differentiate between the Republican Party and MAGA
Yeah.
Republica.
Well, there's certainly
Republican.
that sect exists there,
It's
and
there, but
Trump is still the most popular candidate in the party.
yes. Yeah.
But nowhere near all of them who support Trump, you could really classify what your idea of MAGA Republican is.
Not
But
all of them.
those
no.
that are voting for Biden are a lot more malleable in who they're going to vote
Very
for
true.
next year.
Very true.
And so Kennedy already, first of all, has the name recognition coming from the most popular political dynasty in American history.
And on top of it, he's had a very, I call it a positive, not from my viewpoint, but just in the sense that his face and name have been getting out there very much in the media
absolutely
for the last six months or so. It's been a lot of positive light shined on him to his benefit.
But we
I don't like the guy.
No.
I think he's a clown too. However, the media picture of him has been very much in his favor.
Certainly, and I don't think we should not underestimate the power of name recognition.
Yeah,
if you
it does mean something.
If you consider the median voter in the United States, I mean, you're talking voters that are in their late 40s to mid 50s. They have still some trace of memory of what it meant to be an old school Democrat.
Yeah.
And
I was laughing because a lot of people will say that name recognition is the only reason why Joe Biden is president right now.
No, Joe Biden is president because Obama picked him out of nothingness and made him into
which
something.
gave him name recognition for 8 years, and then continuously for the next 4 years of the Trump
I would
administration.
argue that it's a different kind of name recognition. RFK has name recognition because he has the name Kennedy. Biden has name recognition because he was the vice president for 8 years before he became president.
Yeah, but not just the vice president for 8 years, but the vice president for in cahoots with. I shouldn't say in cahoots. That sounds negative. He was the vice president under President Obama for 8 years, which was quite a powerful thing. The Obama presidency was very powerful in the Democrat world.
Certainly.
So the fact that Joe Biden was the vice president, I think that if anyone else would have been the vice president with Obama, they would also be president right now. They would have also ran.
Probably not Kamala Harris. You could have put her in the same position, and she's very unpopular.
She is. But let me say this, not necessarily in her defense, but I'm just going to put a scenario out there. If Kamala Harris had been vice president under Obama, she would have been greatly affected by that, which would have done something to her way of doing things, which would have made it much more easier to swallow by Democrats. Democrats dislike her about as much as Republicans.
Probably more so.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think she would be a different vice president under Obama than she is under Biden.
I don't think it's so much of the kind of vice president she is that Democrats or that Republicans dislike her. I think it's because when you talk about hypocrisy in politics, she's the greatest hypocrite of them all.
But what I'm saying is that her as vice president under President Obama would have tempered that greatly. In other words, I don't believe that President Biden is overly concerned about whether or not people like Kamala Harris.
No.
I believe that President Obama would have had more of a look at the team thing that he had, the bromance, people call it, with Biden
and Obama
as vice president and vice president. I believe he would have created something.
I don't think there's a bromance. I don't think Obama likes Biden.
Um, I think that he, for whatever reason, distanced him, but they put up a very, if he doesn't like him, they put up a good front when he was vice president.
When he was allowed to come out of, I mean,
Well, I guess what I'm saying, just to finish my thought about Kamala Harris, I believe that if she would have been a vice president under Obama, he would have created some, okay, whether it was genuine or not, there was a bromance there. Maybe it was just created for the moment. But I believe he would have created something similar with Kamala Harris, and she would have been viewed differently. Biden was viewed as this affable, go along, well supportive guy. And I believe Kamala Harris would have been put out there in that same light. If I mean, that was part of Obama's thing
mm-hmm,
to make his candidacy, to make his presidency successful.
mm-hmm.
So I think it's just a crazy thought. I've spoken with other people about this. I think Kamala Harris would be looked at quite differently now if she had been vice president under Obama, and I believe she would in fact be president now.
Yeah, I mean, that, of
I'm
course,
telling you, Obama casts a long shadow.
yeah, he does do that. He does do that.
Listen, I want to ask you. I'm going to say three words,
Mm-hmm.
three locations, and then just tell me your thoughts. Alaska, New Mexico, Norway.
Okay, and my thoughts on those
Mm-hmm.
locations.
You can rank them. You can tell me what you like, what you don't like.
Yeah.
You can tell me specific experiences.
Yeah.
This is the challenge portion of my show.
Sure. Well, let me ask you, why'd you pick those three places?
You have a connection to Alaska, do you
Mhm.
not?
I was, yeah, born there. I'm from there.
You have a connection to New Mexico as well.
I went to school there, but where I spent a large portion of my childhood was in Arizona.
As Neil Young says in his song, "All my changes were there."
Yeah.
Again, when I think of you, I think of that that schooling, that military experience that you had at a very young age.
Yeah.
So that's why I mentioned New Mexico,
Yeah.
and then Norway because that's where
I
you
live
are.
now.
Yeah.
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 No, they are all very different places, of course. Alaska, I'd probably rate number one, hands down. But I could never convince my wife to move there. She finds it to be
Really?
she finds it to be too remote. We used to live in Australia before, and
That's right. That's right.
she
And what part of Alaska was it?
Kodiak Island.
That's pretty remote.
Yeah, I mean everything in Alaska is remote.
Yeah.
80% of the towns in Alaska.
You get out of town and you're
Well, to
out
get
there.
to town, 80% of the towns in Alaska are only accessible by boat or plane.
Right.
You can't drive there. So
Right.
Alaska in itself is a very remote place. But
Yes.
culturally speaking, it's definitely a more individualistic place. You are definitely living in an environment where
Yes.
you sink or swim. You have to know how to take care of yourself.
Talk about local governance.
Certainly, yeah.
You can pull that in from a city hall and pull it right into the home or the homestead.
Yes.
Yes.
The last frontier, as they
Yes,
call it.
absolutely.
New Mexico, it depends on where you are in New Mexico. I enjoyed my time in southern New Mexico. Now, when you get into Albuquerque, I did not like living in Albuquerque.
Really? Tell me
no.
why.
It's a well. First of all, it's not that appealing of a city to live in as far as activities for a young man. There's not a lot to do
No
there.
real amenities.
No, I mean there is a bar and club scene, but that was never my scene.
No.
I was a small town guy, a country boy. You know
Yeah.
that I never liked living in urban settings.
Same here. It doesn't. I don't care where the city is. It can be Albuquerque. It can be where we are right now. I just don't.
Yeah, but that and then you add the other thing with Albuquerque though is crime is just rampant there. At the time we were living there, it was I think the second or third ranking city in America for Grand Theft Auto.
That's right. They're
yeah.
known for that. Yes.
Yeah,
Albuquerque is known for that.
Theft in general was just. I mean, I had things robbed from me living there.
Did you?
And and now since we've left, it has only gotten significantly worse. In fact, where we used to live in Albuquerque has now been absorbed what is called the war zone. There is a war.
Wow.
There's a war zone.
They call it
there.
the war zone.
Yeah, and that has existed for a long time. But when we lived there, we didn't really live near the war zone. But now the war zone has expanded in such a large way that the apartments that we lived in are now a part of that. Yeah, in fact,
wow.
where the complex where we lived, you had the cartels and gangs fighting with each other. where we used to park our car every day, that entire lot was burned. All the cars were burned just
And
in a
isn't that the story of most cities?
yeah.
Over time, they get worse.
Yeah, most cities in America right now, I'd say, are suffering.
Can you pass me the water, please? Um, there we go. Thank you. One of the best things I think my parents did for me and my brother and sister was to move us from the city of Akron when I was 6 years old. Um, Very wise decision, because I go back and I look at that neighborhood now, and good Lord,
Mhm.
I, I don't remember any issues. And my mom tells me there were no issues when we were there, but they could see it coming,
Yeah,
and they moved us out, way out
yeah.
to the cornfields. Um, City problems, Democrat caused. Do you agree with that?
In the sense that they are run by Democrats, yes.
Most cities are run by Democrats.
Mhm.
I was talking the other day. I have a new segment on my show called Coming Home Commentary. And I was talking about how the narrative out there from the political right is that cities are a hellscape and Democrats have to answer for most of the crime in America.
Mhm.
When the fact is that, yeah, I agree. And the facts say that, yes, cities are a hellscape. There is a lot of crime and it is growing in most cities. Not all cities. Surprisingly enough, crime is down in both San Francisco and New York, the two Democrat fortresses
Let's say they're
that
down, or let's say crime peaked.
that's
And
another way of
yeah.
putting it. It's all about the narrative. That's another way of putting it. Uh, that's funny. I have to make a clip out of that. That's a good one. But no, and you're probably right. It did peak, and it's going to go up again. I mean, it is a peak and a valley thing. But doing a little bit of research, like I put on a lab coat and had a microscope. But after reading a little bit, I found that the 25 states, red states, that voted for Trump
Mhm.
versus the 25 blue states that voted for Biden, the
Mhm.
25 red states have a much higher crime rate. Now, we're not looking at cities; we're
Mhm.
just looking at the
States.
states,
Sure,
and
but you'd have to look at
that's
the cities within those states.
yeah. But see, that's the narrative thing. You
Mhm.
know, when someone in a discussion or debate or comment tells me, "Yeah, but Democrats have to stand for this crime; they're responsible." Well, yes, they are in the cities, but what about statewide?
Well, New Mexico is a perfect example of this. For uh, what the state of what the condition of living in Albuquerque exists only in Albuquerque as far as New Mexico goes. You go down to Portales or Clovis or Ruidoso,
Mm,
you do face a different set of problems and different
yeah,
kind of problems.
yeah,
But you're not you do not have the same degree of fearing losing your life or property when you're in those places
right,
as you do living in Albuquerque.
right,
So this is certainly a city problem, and of
yeah.
course you can, because cities are the political centers, or not
For
sorry,
dem
population centers
yeah, yeah,
geographically. Of
yeah,
course, it does help Democrats to shift the
sure.
narrative by saying, "Well, let's not look at the city; let's look at this big state,"
Yeah, but is
and
that
kind of
shifting the
mask the
narrative?
city.
Here's what I'm getting at. I fault the left and the political left and the political right for using narrative to change people's minds about what is factual.
Hmm.
Because you can say that Democrats usually run cities, and those cities usually have big crime problems. That's a fact.
Hmm.
But it seems that the right will just let that stand on its own and say that crime is a Democrat problem
Hmm.
when it's not.
No,
It's a national problem. And when you do look at those 25 states, red states versus the 25 blue states, there's more crime over there. So this
it also depends on
narrative
what kind of
thing,
crime you're talking about. I mean, it's like, okay,
I
if we're
do
talking about
believe,
drug crimes, if somebody
well, I
gets
do believe
caught.
we're talking about violent crime.
Okay, if you're talking
Violent
about
crime.
violent crimes, and then if you're talking about homicides, for example, it's over. I believe it's about 2/3 of all homicides. Let's say firearm related homicides in America happen in 5% of U.S. counties.
Yeah.
And I mean that's a
Yeah.
very small number of
Yeah.
counties where the super majority of murders
Yeah.
are occurring. And
To break it down to cities, we're probably thinking Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York.
yeah,
Yeah.
And so if you were to say, okay, let's calculate crime in America minus this 5%. Let's
Mhm.
look at 95% of the country and not look at this 5%. Suddenly America becomes one of the safest countries on the planet,
Yeah.
crime wise.
Yeah.
So I do think it's important to drill down and look at where the crime is happening. Crime is not happening at a state level. It is happening at a municipality level. And it doesn't matter to me whether it's a city or a small town. And you
To me,
could,
crime is crime. A victim anywhere
yes,
is a victim.
exactly.
So
And you have to evaluate the policies that are um, allowing that crime to happen. And when you have uh, prosecutors saying that they're not going to prosecute for crimes for they're not going to prosecute laws that are broken, laws that are on the books, for example, theft, shoplifting,
I think of San Francisco when you mention this.
most of the cities in California, really,
Yeah.
and a lot of the cities on the East Coast as well. Well, then okay, in practice, you're not prosecuting these crimes,
Mhm.
but in general, what you're doing is you're sending a message to people saying you're weak on crime.
Mhm.
Okay, if you're not going to chase me for this crime, well, you're probably not going to chase me for that crime either. And eventually, people get caught in
Yes.
a pattern of
They get,
crime. They
yeah.
get caught in a world of crime, and then they end up committing crimes that they might not have otherwise committed if they had just been prosecuted for shoplifting that candy
And I
bar.
agree with you on all of that. And that creates a larger and larger problem the longer it goes on. But what I'm talking about is how the political sides latch onto a certain narrative
Well, that's a good
that
one.
that
That's a good
may
narrative, just because that is purely a Democrat policy.
yes,
Because it is only Democrat attorneys general and prosecutors who are saying we're not going to prosecute crimes.
but the
That is
narrative,
that is a Democrat policy to say
and that's a
we're not
fact, yeah, and
prosecuting.
that's quite factual. But there is a greater, more general narrative that just says crime in America is the fault of Democrats. But how can that be when the
I think it would be
numbers?
foolish for anyone to say that.
Well,
Yeah, I mean,
Republicans are saying that.
they and
You
if
hear Ted Cruz,
yeah, if
Marco Rubio all the time. Ted
and I'm
Cruz
not
all the
voting for
time.
either one of those guys. So it's
Another two more reasons why I like you.
yeah. So, I mean,
Hey,
that's
it's it's I think that this conversation so far has shown, and to me this is an important conversation, and it's an important thing to have shown that people on different political standing points have in fact more agreement than disagreement. Because again, to me, the most important thing that a man can do is do right by his family, and you
mhm.
do that. So any disagreement that you and I have after that, there's no yelling, screaming. Disagreement's not going to make me think less of you. But again, this twisting of narratives or this weaponizing of narratives,
Mhm.
I think, gets in the way of these kind of things.
Well, it's so easy
Uh,
to do with social media.
well, yes,
And
I'll say it till I die. These short comments and whatnot on social media is the worst way to communicate.
mhm.
Podcasting, long form discussion like this is the best way to communicate. That's how you know who's who and what they think and where you see eye to eye, where you disagree, and then you take the time to talk about that
Well,
disagreement.
and it puts a face on your opposition. Once you can put a face on your opposition, then
Yeah.
you humanize the conversation,
Yes.
and it becomes a lot more amicable,
Yeah.
and you have there is a general effort at that point to try and find a compromise, and try
Well,
to
nobody
find
wants to
common
compromise.
ground.
Nobody wants. The Democrats don't want to compromise. The Republicans don't want to compromise.
No,
What is that going to lead to in your mind?
uh, I think that a lot of America, as we're seeing it now, but you're going to see America start to become more factioned. I think, and whether that's at the state level or the county level or whatever, but you're going to start
It's
seeing
definitely
that
at the
happen.
local level.
Yeah, you're going to start seeing people getting more involved in politics, which can be a good
School
thing.
boards. Look at
School
school
boards,
boards.
absolutely.
Got to hand it to the right. I don't like what they're doing at these school board with these school boards, but good Lord, is it impressive how organized they're getting at a local level
Hmm.
and doing what they believe is right at the school boards.
Well, because that's where politics matters the most. Is
We're talking
in
about kids,
well, I
families.
mean, at the local level in general. And because
Well, yeah,
once
yeah,
these parents get involved in the school boards, they're more likely to be involved in local politics as well in
that's very
general.
true. The
And so
left is missing out on something by not activizing, or I'm sorry, activating themselves on the local level to the same degree that the right is.
I think the
And we
left
see it with
is
school boards. I think that's the shining example of local activism. Local political activism is what the right is doing in school boards. It's a great thing to be involved. I don't like necessarily all of the changes they're making, but I like that involvement. We need more of that.
well, I think the left is already in those positions
But they're not activized. You know what? The
where they
left
can
got
win.
lazy. Well, the left got lazy on the local level. They go for this thing. Most people agree with us, so we don't really need to do anything. When it's time to run for office, we'll talk about the money we're going to give them, and they'll vote for us.
Mhm.
They got lazy.
But we're talking about the school board level. In those positions, in those kinds of local positions, I think Democrats are already in those positions where they can be.
I see.
Where
I
you're
see.
seeing
Yeah,
the pushback is in only certain places around the country. You're not seeing this kind of pushback in Chicago, for example. You're
that's an
seeing this
interesting observation.
you're
Yeah,
seeing this happen in Florida, in Virginia, in
Texas.
Texas. You're seeing this, and only in certain places within those states as well. And in those
That's a good
places,
point.
it doesn't matter how hard the Democrats fight; those people are not going to get on board with the Democrat platform. As far as the culture wars go, and those parents are fired up because
Yeah,
their values and family come. I mean, you're not going to stand in the way of that.
yeah.
That's where you get into politically dangerous territory.
Well, and the problem just grows for the Democrats. It just grows when look at what Hillary Clinton did. She totally neglected states that were actually quite important
Hmm.
to her campaign, but she ignored it. I don't know, out of arrogance, out of
Hubris.
well, there you go,
Yeah,
yeah, and
absolutely.
and
Hillary Clinton's got a lot of that,
and I
and then
think that
some.
is indicative of the greater problem within the Democrat Party in general,
Hmm.
hubris,
Yep. Um,
and
well, she didn't just ignore them. She also categorized half the country as a
yes,
basket of deplorables.
yeah,
And she did it again recently. She didn't use those
she did. I
words.
saw that, yeah,
Yeah,
but it's
but
basically the
it was
same thing.
basically that. And
That's
then
the
she
kind of stuff
said,
you don't say out loud.
no,
Think it if you want, but don't
forced
say
reprogramming is what she said. We
that
should be
was a
looking.
little that was a little strong.
Yeah.
I have a lot of words for the MAGA Republicans, but to use terms like forced reprogram, I mean, she couldn't make it any easier
No,
for them to fire back at her
no.
and kind of, yeah, see, she's exactly like we told you she was.
Yeah.
Strange that someone who is as seasoned as she is, well, I guess it's not strange because it's hubris. I was
It's
going to say she should be smarter than this because
and
she's
old
so
age.
seasoned.
Why are
Do you
we?
think so? Do you think she's getting
I think our whole elite political class should just move on. That they're all old age.
Mitch McConnell?
Mitch McConnell,
Oh, please.
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden? Look, look.
You can't mumble three words together to make a sentence.
If nobody else is standing up for the Democrats, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden.
Mhm.
But good gosh, I wish somebody else would. How is this man who is almost 80 years old representative of most Democrats? I
It's a good
don't.
question. It's your
Yeah,
party, so
yeah.
I don't know the answer to
I
that.
don't see it. It's my party by default
Yeah.
because there's nobody really thinking the way I think.
Mhm.
Well, let me ask you that. You are a libertarian. You are highly involved in the Liberalistene
Mhm.
here in Norway.
Yeah.
Um, but you're the chairman for Republicans abroad. I kind of touched on that, but how do you make that fit?
So
I can I don't agree with everything the Democrat Party does. I vote for them, and I say it openly. I vote for them by default.
Mhm.
Now, of course, within that, I'm going to look at the candidates, especially on the local level. I'm going to look at them. I'm going to educate myself about what's going on and then vote accordingly. But in general, I am aware of that. I have no choice practically
Mhm.
because the Democrat Party is full of these Joe Biden types, these
Mhm.
Hillary Clinton types.
Yeah.
But how do you make this fit? Just explain it to me,
Well,
please.
it's
And this isn't an attack. This is a question
Oh, no,
out of curiosity.
I've
I'm genuinely
I've
curious.
gotten this question many times
Yeah.
from friends and foes, and
I'm a friend.
yes, but so it's important to look at the differences in the systems first of all between the
Right.
United States and Norway. The United States is a two-party system. Now,
Yes.
yes, we have the Libertarian Party, we have the Green Party, and
But
a
they're
few
not
other.
viable.
they're not viable at the moment, and it'll be a while before any of them are. The Libertarian Party is the third largest party in America,
Yes.
and they have been doing some pretty major shakeups
Yes.
internally in the last year or two.
Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see what they do with that in the upcoming election. But it will be a Democrat or a Republican who wins. It won't be an independent.
That's the default.
Yeah.
I was mentioning before.
Well, and one of the big reasons for that is because we have a first past the post majority takes all system in the United States. And so as an American voter and looking at that system, I have to determine where am I most likely to make an impact.
Yeah.
In Libertarian Party, you could argue you can have an impact as opposition, but in the Republican Party, you can have impact on internal political internal party platform and how that affects politics in general.
Yep.
And therefore I fall under the Rand Paul wing of the party, the classical. And I don't even agree with everything that Rand Paul does, but
he's the guy that is most in line with your way of thinking.
and before him it was his father, Ron Paul. And then you have Thomas Massey as well. He's a he's an admirable politician there too, I think. Whereas in Norway, you mentioned that I'm active in Liberalistene here. In Norway, the way the system exists is you don't need 51%.
No.
You could we just had a local election here. In theory, you could get in the single digit percentage points and get a handful of seats in the city council.
I just had a communications employee for the Red Party here, and she was talking about how they actually and that party is like that big on a spectrum that's that big, and yet they made gains and got more seats in parliament and whatnot.
Yeah, well,
so it's possible, it's doable.
Yeah, and so you can, and therefore with that system in Norway, you have a lot larger menu of what to choose from.
Yes.
And when I first came to Norway, I looked at the parties and tried to figure out which one I could be on, because at the time when I was immigrating, it was illegal for me to work, and I didn't want the gap in my resume. So I figured, well, I can probably my education is in politics and psychology, political science and psychology, and so I looked at that menu and eventually I found Liberalistene, which at the time was only less than half a year old. It was still very, very brand new party, just had been founded, established. And as I read through the program, I found that this party is more of my party than my own party in America. And
really,
but pretty much since then,
interesting.
I have I have been on the what do you call it in English? Sentralstyret, the board of directors.
Board of directors
for 6 or 7 years now, or since 2015. I had a year and a half break in between there from the board, but otherwise have been there. And in Norway, so you have that system where you have the bigger menu, and you only need a few percentage points to get your foot in the door. Once you get your foot in the door, you have access. And once you have access, you can see what's going on behind closed doors and in the system, and then that gives you more political capital because you know what's going on. Now that's how it should work ideally. Now in Norway, though, the because in America you could say the issue is that it is a two-party system, and in practice the Democrats and the Republicans tend to be pretty lockstep with each other on the important things. Nothing ever really gets done, and a lot of it, we have this term in Norwegian called valgflesk, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and that does consume most of American politics.
Yes.
But in Norway, even though you have this variety of parties, there really is a consensus on most issues here, just like there is in the United States. That same problem exists here that it exists in the United States. It's no different.
No.
You would be hard-pressed as an average voter in Norway to identify any meaningful or substantive difference between Arbeiderpartiet and Høyre, for example.
Right.
These parties,
a left party and a right party.
Yeah, these parties agree on just about everything. Where they disagree is on the percentage points of how much tax are we going to increase next year, but they're going to both raise taxes. It's just,
that's a great point for anybody who follows Norwegian politics. I think that kind of sums it up right there. How much is the tax going to be raised? Because they are going to raise it regardless of which party affiliation.
We just published a graph in our party to show this, that over the last 2 decades, for every year we put a graph
Yeah.
based on whether it was red or blue running
Yeah.
the country, and how the taxes and fees were
Yeah.
changed or
Yeah.
affected by that. And it's just a smooth hill going up all the time.
Regardless
And
of
it doesn't
party.
matter who's in charge.
Yep.
So, because you have that consensus here, that opens up for a growing number of micro parties, because
Yeah.
there are a lot of Norwegians who are waking up to this fact that actually nothing is getting done for me at the government level.
Yes.
These government employees or elected officials, and that's another problem that we have here in Norway, is identical to the problem we have in the United States, is that the vast majority of rules and regulations that are put upon us and enforced on
Mhm.
us are created by unelected bureaucrats. They are
Yes.
not created by those who are elected to
Yep.
the office. So it opens this door for a large variety of micro parties that are growing. You can see how well INP did this election, for
Yep.
example. Rut has had some gains. MDG, thankfully, the Green Party has seen a rapid decline.
I feel sorry for them. They mean so well, but I think again, messaging, just like the Democrats in general, are poor at messaging. I think the Green Party is horrible at messaging.
They are that.
They say some of these things, and everybody gets this look. Everybody
Yep.
gets that look on their face.
Yeah,
Even their supporters.
we call them the water party, the watermelon party.
Watermelon Party.
Yeah. They're red, they're green on the outside, but they're still red commies on the inside. And
I like that.
and so, but anyways, so what ends up happening though, parties like the Green Party, parties like the Industry Party, these are not actually political parties. These are glorified interest groups. These
I was gonna
are,
say a social movement.
yeah, they are a lobbyist movement.
Yep.
They are an interest group.
Lobbyists. Yep.
If you handed the keys to the country to any one of these micro parties, they wouldn't have any idea what to do next, because their platform isn't designed to manage the country. It's designed to address a handful of issues.
I always wonder, why do they do that? What is the purpose? There's no money in it like there is in the States.
No, but
I don't understand. I don't understand why they take the time. I don't get it.
well,
I'm missing something, because I really don't understand why
well,
they
as
do.
far as those parties go, it's because they are passionate about those topics. The Green Party is passionate about environmental law, and the Industry Party is passionate about oil production.
But I would like to I don't know, give him a truth serum or something and ask him, now, do you really believe you have a chance in changing anything? And I think they would say no.
Well, the thing is
And that's why I don't understand why
they do have a chance at changing something. That's the thing. Is if you look at the last local elections in Oslo, for example, in 2017.
But the Green Party didn't have any gains then.
They did. They were part of the coalition, and that's why Oslo has had such disastrous environmental policy.
In this last.
No, the election before last.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No,
I'm
this
sorry.
election they had lost.
Yes.
I mean,
right. Okay,
they did not do well
yeah.
at all.
Yes.
But in the previous election,
They were
you
actually in
had-
the coalition. Yes.
in Oslo, Høyre, the right party, had been running Oslo for 20 years. They
That's
were in
right.
power. And then you had this shakeup in the previous local elections that forced the left wing parties to form this coalition.
Yeah.
And in that formation, you had SV, which is the socialist left party.
Mhm.
They got, I think, around 5% of the vote, yet somehow got to get the mayor seat.
Right.
They became the mayor
Right.
of Oslo with only 5% of the
5%.
vote. MDG, the Green Party, they got to be in charge of environmental policy. And SV, the Socialist Left Party, they also got to be in charge of a lot of welfare policy and welfare spending policy. And both of these parties almost bankrupted the city in their spending. But they did. But in that period of time, in that window of time, they were able to affect change, because the left-wing parties that had the biggest
coalition,
numbers,
the
they
parliamentary
needed them to
system,
be a
yeah.
part of the coalition. And so
Right.
now you have, in some communes around Norway, you have where after this last election, there were talks about whether or not FRP was going to team up with the Labour Party, or whether or not MDG
That's
was
right.
going to team up with the
That's
Industry
right.
Party, even in
And
certain
that's wild.
coalitions. It is wild, and
Yeah.
and that is hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Because when you're supposed to say that your platforms are antithetical to each other,
Right.
but we all
All
know
of a
that
sudden
they're
there's
not,
a coalition. Yeah.
because there is a consensus on everything else.
Yeah.
And so then you have compromises. Then you have to ask, what's the point? And now our party, we are still by definition a micro party.
But wait, what makes you guys different? Because you guys are different than the
Yes.
other micro parties.
Yes.
What's different about you guys?
Because our platform, first of all, is based on a political philosophy and based in a consistent principle. You can ask a policy question of our party and where do you stand on that, and you can predict where our stance
So it
is
can
going to
be
be.
said that these other micro parties are pretty much just one issue
Yeah,
parties,
you
whereas
can't
you guys have a full political philosophy
platform
covering all aspects of politics.
that's grounded in a principled foundation.
Yes.
You can ask a question,
Mhm.
and if you've read our platform, if you've read our Principe program, if you've read our vision document, if you've read
Yeah.
all this, you will be able to predict where we stand on an issue.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
these other parties that tend to be more interest parties, it's a shot in the dark. I mean, it's whatever the issue is, if it's not directly related to what their focus is, be it environment, industry, feminism, whatever, because there's another party called, Feministiske Initiative.
Yeah.
And you have, I
Yeah.
mean, these are interest groups. And if you ask a question, a policy question that is outside their bubble of thought,
Yeah.
uh,
They're kind of
they're going to be lost
blank.
for
Yeah.
an answer unless they get a directive from those who sit on the board and make a decision specifically about that policy.
Is there a person or a subgroup within your party in Norway who is responsible for this? Or because I think it boils down to organization.
Mhm.
You guys seem very well organized compared to the other so-called micro parties. Who's responsible for that?
Uh,
Somebody had to think this up because you guys haven't been around for that
the,
long
the party was
in the
established
form.
in late 2014.
Right.
I came in early 2015, and then we participated in our first election. We got enough signatures to participate in just in Oslo election in 2015,
Yeah.
which is actually, I should say, that was the election I was referring to earlier.
Okay.
And then we became Landsdekkende, a national
Mhm.
party. I believe within a couple of years of that.
Yeah.
So by 2017, and so now we are.
Congratulations on that, by the way. I think that's impressive.
It was, if patting ourselves on the back, I have to say it was at a much faster pace than other parties had achieved.
Yeah.
In
Very
the past.
impressive, I think.
And so now we have, now we are still a Landsdekkende party. Now, where we run into a wall is it's very hard. Our message is difficult to sell. It is difficult to sell to a country that has a complacent environment of politics. Norwegians in general tend to be very complacent people.
Yeah.
Our politics kind of rock that boat. And
Yes.
if
Yeah.
there's one thing things Norwegians don't like is rocking that boat.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, the number of Norwegians who are dependent financially on the nanny state is growing every year. And so for our politics to come in and say, we want to reevaluate that dependency,
You're upsetting a lot of people
Yeah.
by taking that issue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, we're kind of running out of time, both of us. You're gonna meet my kids
Mhm.
before we leave. I got to talk with my wife a little bit before she runs off to do some things. You have to get home to your beautiful family. Let me ask you this in closing: what is the biggest thing? And please answer in one sentence. I'm
Mhm.
going to challenge you again. What is the biggest thing that government does that you wish it didn't do? And I think that's a challenging question for you because your thought process, your politics are in the direction of what you are for,
Mhm.
of what you are positive to. But this is the opposite thing. What does government do? The worst thing, biggest thing that they do that you don't want it to do?
Taxation and war.
Taxation and war. Two good answers. I think I have to agree with that too. Taxation and war. This is another podcast episode to have, maybe with a panel, you and a couple of other people, but that whole issue of how expats are taxed
Mhm.
and the tax reporting, the level of tax reporting that we are expected to do by the IRS.
Thanks, Obama.
Yeah, yes.
I had to throw
Shame.
that in.
No, I'm with you. Shame on him. Shame on him.
Mm.
It's criminal.
Yeah. Our
It's so
country,
punitive. It's
the United
punitive.
States is the only country on the planet that
only
punishes its
country.
expats the way that it does.
And it's so punitive, whether you're in compliance or not.
Mhm.
Even if you're in compliance, it's punitive.
Even if you know it or not.
It's punitive.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's almost as if it was put in place just to punish. Now, nominally, it's in place to combat, they say it's to combat money laundering,
Mhm.
terrorist financing, and whatnot. And I don't know the effect that it's had on that, but what I do see is that normal people like you and I, middle class to upper middle class people, are suffering because of it.
Yeah.
So
It's not only that, it hasn't had a big effect on money laundering.
it probably hasn't.
When the Biden administration says they're going to hire 80,000 new IRS employees or agents, and then also the IRS is now going to be opened up to any transactions that are $600 or more.
Yeah. It's crazy.
They're not going after the white collar.
That is wild.
They're going after you and me.
No more gifts to my mom back home, I guess. Listen, Austin, we end this episode laughing. We end this conversation laughing. A lot of people, I got to tell you, some people that I told I was having, John, you've got to get them this time. And that's not what this program is about. It's about dialogue.
We didn't even get to education. I thought
we didn't even get to educational because and actually that was this. I'm glad you said that, because that was the actual stimulus to me inviting you to come in. Is you made a comment on a thread that I had posted on social media. Do you have time to talk about this? Can we get into this for about 10 minutes before we have to stop? And this reminded me of why I admire you. You made a comment saying basically that the government needs to keep their hands off of your children, off of your family. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, amen. Yes, that's right. Mm-hmm. And good Lord, the pepper I got for agreeing with a non-Democrat. Yep. And that's part of the, I'm here to foment dialogue and stuff. So I just don't get into that thing that you're supposed to get, John, you got to get him this time when he comes. What is there to get? No. What I want to get is more in line with how you think, because I'm curious. Yeah. But when you said that.
That's a dialogue. That's what's
exactly.
important.
And I love dialogue. And when you said that, you want the government to keep their hands off of your children. What did you mean by that? Can you tell me the context?
Well, I didn't say keep your hands off my children. I said stay away from my children.
Stay away from my children. Yeah. Tell me the context where that applies.
Well, in the sense that that the government should be dictating any kind of policy that crosses into family territory. Mm-hmm. I think. And I outlined it, I think, in that thread.
Schooling was
schooling was the specific topic we were discussing, and that schooling should be focused entirely on whatever's outlined in the curriculum. Basically, the relationship between parents and school should be perfectly transparent. In that whatever the student is learning, the parents should be able to audit at any given moment, and if the parents don't like it, then there's a lot of problems here. But then they should be able to intervene,
right,
and make sure that their children abstain from whatever it is that they don't like. But also that the most important thing, I think, to solve this problem, that is the problem of public education in general, mm-hmm. At least as a first step, is school choice, where schools are competing to deliver the best level of education, where parents can send their kid to a school. Basically, you'd start with all parents get a voucher.
Yeah.
You take that voucher to the school you want to send your kid to.
So your tax dollars go to that school.
Yes.
But can't that lead to schools being shut down because not enough people want to go? And is that a bad thing?
No. If the school's a bad school because not enough people want to go, then it should be shut down.
But I want my kids to go to that school.
Mm-hmm. Well,
but it's going to get shut down because there's not enough others who want their kids to go to that school.
But no one else.
What do I do then?
But no one else has the obligation to go to that school because you want your kids to go to that school.
No,
it's and there's obviously a problem if or it's either there's a problem or there is a better alternative that fit with their family. Just because those alternatives may not fit with your family doesn't mean that they should have something taken.
Exactly, but isn't that then a certain form for government or maybe not government overreach, but overreach from the rest of society, because they are then deciding that I have to send my kids potentially to a school that I don't necessarily.
You do that now. At least in that situation, you have more choice. Yeah. And I'm saying, as I said in the beginning, that would, in my view, be the first step. Ideally speaking, I mean, if I were made president tomorrow, which I'm turning 35 this month, so I qualify. No. If I were going to be made president, one of the first things I would do is get rid of the Department of Education entirely. and restore education to the state level and allow each state to determine how education policy is going to be run
So
at the state level. And
I want to say then real quick, because to remove the Department of Education in your scenario doesn't mean that there's no guidance, there's no guidelines, there's no oversight. It's just that oversight is taken away federally,
yes,
and the oversight drops to the state.
And then you have 50 different experiments competing with each other
because
and you
there's
see which one succeeds, which one does well, and
yeah,
this is all for the sake of the children you're trying to
yes,
educate. Right now, it's not working. We can see that it's not working.
Yeah.
The federal one size Department of Education system is not working. Over the last 70 years, for example, the number of bureaucrats and non-teaching professionals in the school system has increased 700 to 800%.
Yeah.
Whereas the number of put it this way, that is 7 to 8 times more than the number of students that have increased there.
Yeah.
And teachers, I think,
so
is
something's
around
out of whack.
200 to 300%. The spending per pupil has skyrocketed.
Yes.
And this year alone is the highest it's been in almost 2 decades. It's now at close to $15,000 per student.
But isn't that, let's talk about messaging. I think that would be a great idea to bring the oversight, the guidance, the funding a little closer to home by turning it over to the states. Take it away from federal and turn it over to the states. But in the messaging, nobody says that. They just say, let's get rid of the Department of Education. Betsy DeVos, Ted Cruz, DeSantis. I never hear them say, take away the Department of Education, and let the states. They never, that part does not get said at all,
or at least it doesn't get. At least it doesn't get airtime. Ted Cruz and DeSantis and Betsy Davos. I mix her name up.
What did I say? Davos.
Yeah, it's easy to mix her name up with that Swiss town where the World Economic Forum meets. But in any case, I've listened to all of them speak on this subject at length, and they do discuss this, where it should be more localized and allow for competition in the education, because competition is a healthy thing. Competition breeds better results. And if you're in a system that has
Isn't that what we want for our kids? We want better results. We want
instead of the system we have now, where teachers are no longer responsible to the student or the family, the teachers are responsible to the union and the bureaucracy, and that's a big machine that's only growing. And imagine it's $15,000 per student in America. $15,000 per student. This is regardless of location. If you look at federal spending on education, that's $15,000. Now, if you let that go into more open market where competition was key, the price of education would come down drastically.
Absolutely,
and the quality of education would go up. Now, I said that would be a first step. In my view, eventually it would become almost entirely privatized through a scaffolding approach. Because you don't want to rip the rug out from under people. You don't want to say,
well, you would create a have and have not situation.
And as I say, you wouldn't want to rip the rug out underneath people. You would want to show them people, because when you start talking about get rid of the Department of Education, well, people get really nervous when you say that. Well, what about the children? And appeal to the authority. We need this because it's the only way we know how. When really that's not the case. It's the status quo that's been in place, and it is a failing status quo by any metric.
Yes.
And so the idea in that sense is to introduce, with the public spending that exists now, but introduce it in a way that opens to competition and allows the governance of school to happen at a more local level. And then I think people will see, okay, this is working.
It's a much more democratic process than the current one, if you ask me.
Yes, absolutely.
It puts it in the hands of a layer of government that's much closer to home.
Yeah.
And if I don't like the policy, it's much more representative of the people.
Yes. And if I don't like the policy of one school, if I don't like what they are introducing at that school or how they are educating children at that school, I say, well, it's not for me and my family. It doesn't mean that it's not for the families that are there, but it should be easy for me to then just take that money and go give it to a school that teaches my kids the way I want.
What do you consider indoctrination of children with in relation?
Public education is indoctrination.
Period. Break that down a little bit, though, because that's one thing that I hear a lot from people on the right. And now I'm hearing it from you, and I understand that no one wants their children indoctrinated.
Well, we're all indoctrinating our children to some degree.
We do that, yes. I've definitely indoctrinated. If you talk to my kids at length, you're going to hear a lot of what I think and feel coming out of their mouths.
I think if you're honest, if people are honest in the conversation, it's not that they're opposed to indoctrinating children. Where it comes in is who's going to do the indoctrinating.
Yeah.
I want my kids indoctrinated with my values. I want them indoctrinated with prioritizing what I think they should be prioritizing, because I know, because I'm their father.
Uh-huh.
You cannot um, make any claim in any sane sense that somehow my kids are more important to a bureaucrat than they are to me.
Right. Right.
They are my foremost
Mhm.
priority, and I know what's best for them.
Yep.
No one else knows what's best for them. I
Mhm.
know what's best for them. So once you start crossing into that territory, then we have a problem.
Then we have a problem.
And that's where I say, stay away from my kids.
I love it. I love it. I will stand side by side with you and shout that. Government, stay away from my kids. I got it. I got this.
Mm.
Um, but briefly before we wind this up, the indoctrination thing. There's a lot of people saying that education being taught from a historical perspective needs to be stopped because it's indoctrinating. Um, and this thing about making, well, I'll tell you, teaching slavery, teaching about slavery as it happened. There are school boards, there are certain governors, DeSantis and Abbott come to mind, saying that certain things about slavery cannot be taught because it's a form of indoctrination and it makes white kids feel bad.
I think you're subtly alluding to Republican fears of CRT.
Well, not subtly. CRT is a long discussion because that term, the concept of CRT, has been bastardized.
Well, it depends on who you talk to, but yes.
Well, if I talk to anybody
for the narrative.
Well, back to the narrative thing, yeah. But you must agree. Well, you must not. You don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
But can you agree that CRT has been weaponized by the right? It is a weapon that the right slings.
Because I think it was a weapon slung at the children first, and I think parents are defending
Really?
themselves against it. Yes.
I'm gonna have you come back and we're gonna. Well, I said we were going to talk about education stuff, and we're only talking about it now for 10 minutes at the end. But I would love to have you come back to talk about CRT, because I don't believe that most people know what it is.
No.
I'm not going to be presumptuous and say you don't know what it is, but I think a lot of people don't know what it is. And I think that because a lot of people don't know what it is, some very smart people on the right found a way to weaponize it and use it to get votes, and it's working.
Well, it's working because the Republicans didn't need to weaponize it. Parents are seeing it. Parents are seeing that, and it's not. So here's the difference: is what, and this is talk about narratives. This is what a lot of the Democrats will do is say that, well, CRT isn't being taught in school. That's a college level.
Is it?
No, CRT isn't being taught in school. I won't say that it is. What I will say is that teaching methodologies are being employed in school that are informed by CRT, and those are two very different things.
Yes, agreed. Agreed.
And I do think, and not think, I know, there is, and I granted, I don't think it's as prolific as a lot of the Republican talking heads are claiming it is.
Thereby the weaponization of CRT.
But I think it's a warranted
not
concern.
Of teaching methods that are similar to CRT.
No.
But actual
CRT is a theory, and I think
yes.
that theory is informing a lot of teachers in how to teach. And I'm not saying that they're teaching a college level legal theory or ideology that CRT is to 4-year-old kids. What I'm saying is I think there are a lot of teachers who are informed by this theory, which in essence says that every institution of America is race-based and racist, and it basically reformulates Marxist thinking of oppressor and oppressed, from and that we are in this perpetual condition of oppressor and oppressed, and that condition exists basically based entirely on immutable characteristics. I'm white, you're black, so therefore I am by default your oppressor.
I'm gonna love when we talk about this, because this is another issue where we agree on a lot. I don't see white people as my oppressor. Can white people be oppressive? Absolutely. Have they been? For sure.
Anybody can be oppressive. But
yes.
As it comes to your original question on this thread of thought, I have nothing against teaching the genuine conditions of what slaves endured in the 19th century.
Yeah.
Nothing against teaching that history. We should all learn that history when it comes to any type of oppression or genocide. Another comparison to that, for example, I have walked the camps and barracks of Auschwitz and Birkenau, and I think everybody should, just as I think everybody should learn what slaves endured in the 19th century. I have nothing opposed to teaching history, but it is certainly important the context and how you teach that history is important.
Yes.
You're going to tell a young white
See,
student
yep.
today that he's at fault for what happened 150 years ago. No, I'm not going to let that happen.
I'm not going to let that happen either. I don't think that's right. But I'll take it a step further and say I don't think that that is happening in this large, overwhelming, nation-crushing degree that a lot of people on the right make it out to be. You're coming at it from a different perspective than a lot of other people on the political right and the Republican Party are coming from. So again, I think this is an issue where you and I agree on a lot of things, and there's a few small nuances where we would disagree. But I think it would be a very good discussion to have with you
Certainly.
on CRT.
I look forward to it.
Next time you come, we got to set aside time. You've got to bring your wife, bring your kids.
Yeah.
We got to hang out. I'm a great cook.
Yeah.
My wife is not. That is not why I married her. And I would love to just make a whole afternoon out of it. I told you before, I call you friend, I call you brother. I would love to meet your family. You and I think so much alike on so many issues. I know our families would be a good match.
Absolutely.
And we're just down the road from each other.
Yes, we are.
So let's just make that,
neighbors.
Yeah. So let's just make that happen.
Well, the feeling's mutual, and I appreciate you having me on your show again.
Thank you, brother. It's these kind of discussions that, I learned a lot. I think I told you before, I bring people on that inspire me, motivate me in some way, or I think I can learn something from them. And you fit all of those categories. When you turn 35, if you run for president, I just might vote.
Careful.
Let me be careful. Let's have a few more discussions. Let's talk about CRT first. Okay. Let's do that before you turn 35.
Sure.
But it's you definitely are someone who I think I can learn some things from, because I don't, by admission, I don't know that much about liberalistene here in Norway or libertarians back home. So you have educated me, and I thank you for that. And that's part of why I love you. So thank you so much, Austin.
I appreciate it.
I usually tell people to look into that camera. Mm-hmm. And say something out there.
Yeah, you did that last time.
And I did that last time. So I don't want to do that. But I do want to ask you to give some information to the people watching about where they can find you and follow your political journey. Because I know some people are looking. They just like the last time you're liberalist, I never heard of them.
Yeah.
So,
well, actually,
and that's not an affront. It's just a fact. You're one of the smaller parties, but I think you guys have a good message. So can you please look in that camera, tell people where to find more out?
Certainly. I mean, since I was last here, actually, when I was last here, I actually didn't have any publicly accessible.
Right.
And you encouraged me to do that. And actually, several people had been encouraging me for years to do that. News producers in particular were getting frustrated. Yeah. But of course, colleagues, political colleagues of mine, and I have done that since then.
Good.
So you can find my public page on.
Let's grab the microphone.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
You can find my public pages on Facebook. It's you can find my name, Austin Rasmussen. I think the username is Austin.Alexander.Rasmussen. That's my middle name.
Spell Rasmussen for them, please.
Well, Alexander has a different spelling as well. It's Alekzandr, and Rasmussen is Rasmussen. But first thing, I mean, that page is not as active as a lot of political pages are.
Might be one day.
Maybe. But I would encourage you to find the party. You can find that at lib.no or liberalistene.org. And that the party also has profiles on all major social media platforms. But on the website, you can look in more detail what our platform is and all the documentation on what we stand for and largely where my positions are. There's some little things in the platform that I'm not particularly passionate about, but
no organization should be a monolith.
No, but generally
there should be a little dissent internally, and that leads to betterment.
Absolutely. I would say the party platform is a good general baseline for what my philosophy and politics are.
Excellent. Check it out there, people. Agree with him or not, you've got to admire this brother's intelligence. You've got to admire the way he puts his arguments out there. I certainly do. I speak for him. And if you are a blind follower of John Allen, which I hope you are not, but if you are, I'm speaking for this guy. Check him out. Go to the website and learn more about his party, learn more about the work that he's doing, and let's see what happens when he turns 35. Austin, thank you, man.
Thank you.
Thanks.